Global SEO feels overwhelming these days. New market demands require unique approaches, language barriers create unexpected obstacles, cultural differences impact search behavior. How can you scale internationally without sacrificing on the local level? According to a 2024 report by Weglet, 75% of marketers agree that localized content significantly increases customer engagement, yet only 15% reportedly effectively manage SEO for multiple markets. This highlights the growing complexity of successful global SEO. This is the Voice of Search podcast. My name is Tyson, and joining us today is my friend, longtime colleague, Sebastian Egger, SEO consultant at SEO Seb, and one of our experts in residence at Previsible. Today, Sebastian is going to be sharing his insights into how to effectively manage global SEO across multiple markets. C, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me back. I think it's been a minute since I've been on. So yeah, good to be back.
It's been far too long.
Far too long.
How you been?
Not bad, not bad. Enjoying life in APAC. Currently in Tokyo. So I've been doing a few conferences. So doing my rounds of finally getting out there. I think when I was at Square, I wasn't really allowed to do much influencing or much self promotion. Let's put it that way. So now I'm catching up a little bit, but yeah, it's been fun. It's been fun to try to break apart the whole APAC market, mostly unsuccessfully, but it's a good challenge.
Don't sell yourself short. I mean, the chains and shackles are off, and you're able to speak freely about the work that you've really been doing for quite some time. I mean, you have an international background, of course, like anyone that maybe is not aware, like you have roots in Europe, spending time living there, as well as in the US, and then now further expanding that experience into Apex. And I know probably some of the listeners have seen some of your kind of post and information from some of these conferences that you've done in Korea. And so I think it's a perfect time to have you back on the podcast and kind of share with our listeners a little bit of your experience and successes moving, not just on like one market, but really thinking about it from like a global perspective.
hmm Yeah, yeah, exactly. Love it. Yeah, the conference I did over in Korea was interesting because it was figuring out how to speak to a completely different market, yet with still with the current SEO landscape that's ever changing. So an interesting challenge, but even over there, even in a landscape that's very different, the interest still remains very, very high.
Which, like, maybe on that point too, like how have you been seeing the evolution in kind of like global SEO? Like do you feel like your approach or tactics have shifted
Mm,
in recent years,
mm.
or has it been kind of, more of a continuation of status quo?
Yeah, I would say it's a mix of both, but in general, definitely more of a shift. The first thing is it's been a shift because as you work on different markets, and actually let's use Korea as an example, the Google market share is 50% Google and 50% Naver. So there, when speaking to that market, one of the mistakes that I did is when I first did the conference, I actually didn't know that. I completely ignored that, and it wasn't until I spoke to people, and actually the conference owner was like, Sebastian, just FYI, when you speak to these people, there's 50% neighbor, and I'm like, okay, I probably should have done a little bit more research. So don't be like me. Research beforehand. Don't assume that Google has 90% market share. Different countries have different search engines. We all know about China. We know about Russia, but a lot of people don't really know. A common misconception also with Japan is people think that Yahoo is majority shareholder. That's actually not true. Google is primary. So in that case, it's kind of business as usual. But it's weird because with the rise of just large language models these days, that's basically on everyone's mind. And that's basically the main thing that people want to talk to me about is how to adapt. But
Mm.
then I also work, a friend of mine, He works in France, and so I've been just helping him and coaching him. And over in France, you don't actually have AI overviews. So then it's, or at least yet, on whenever this podcast recorded, June 5th, AI overviews are not present. Maybe, who knows? By the time it launches, they're in France, and then its comment is useless. But so basically, you have to be, with all the changes happening and the differences in route and search engine market share, you you have to do research and understand these different nuances. You can't come in and expect that. For example, in France, AI overviews are everywhere. It's like, no, no, you're still dealing with a gold rush of high traffic. Korea is Naver, so your optimization is going to be Naver Webmaster Tools, and not just Google Webmaster Tools. Yeah.
And what's like, how do you think about the balance? Because, at least at the enterprise level,
Hmm.
you're not focused on one market. And
Yeah.
so from like
Yeah.
the executive or leadership level, you're looking
Hmm.
at what's our global strategy, whether it's like
Hmm.
specific products or services, positioning, what have you. But then you have like how that translates to the tactical local level. Like,
Hmm.
how do
Hmm.
you look at balancing the uniqueness of a market, but then
Mm.
also creating consistency or alignment to like a global vision or strategy of a business?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because a lot of American companies, well, they might be successful from a product perspective, product penetration, very successful internationally. I mean, like the top companies in the world are mostly American companies and their products are used worldwide. But also, to my surprise, a lot of these companies do a very poor job at localization. So I always think that if only they would do an even better job, I can't even imagine how much better their market penetration rate is. And over at Square, when I led SEO over there, what was interesting is we put a huge focus on localization, and we were mostly competing with local products, local companies rather than the global companies. So I can see here a just high advantage of the localization. Uh, but I think going back to initially your question, I think I veered off a little bit. One of the things that I would do is I try to understand the total addressable search volume. Basically, when we enter new markets, people would do like TAM analysis, total addressable market analysis, and that looks at just a myriad of different factors, but it never includes organic search. Never in these analysis, it never includes how people are searching. So what I did is I stayed very close to the people who did these researches, and I translated just normal search volume into total addressable search volume by products, because you do the TAM analysis from a product perspective, right? What you do, you want to do the exact same thing. Whatever they're doing, you're copying everything, but you're just changing the KPI to that total addressable search volume. And first of all, you want to see, does it match up or not? If it doesn't match up, and very often you'll see some small mismatches, it gives you an idea that maybe what people are looking for may be a little bit different than expectations, and that's where it requires a slight differences in strategy per market.
Taking that information, I feel like you go two different directions with that,
Hmm.
where you have like managing up with it, which
Hmm.
I think could be an interesting thing to look at, but then also
Hmm.
like, and I think maybe more straightforward is like, okay, great, that then shifts how we prioritize on a local level. I think that's probably where most SEOs feel more like comfortable. Like,
Hmm.
what recommendations or advice would you have? Because again, I feel like SEOs like will grasp and get how to capture that, like what you
Hmm.
said.
Hmm.
What to do with it is probably the more ambiguous or
Hmm.
tricky piece. So, like, would you have any advice for SEOs out there into how to kind of manage up with that
Yeah.
information? Because I would assume too that's really valuable, and it may be a difficult conversation to have, but if you are able to have that conversation,
Hmm.
you're really going to elevate the importance or like value that
Hmm.
search can bring beyond
Hmm.
just revenue of the channel.
Yeah, yeah. It starts with being in whatchamacallit, the omni-channel marketing conversations. So for example, we can use Square or any companies. There's always like a brand awareness team. They do like net promoter
Mm.
scores. And then in our case, we had a go-to-market team. And you might have just whatever other teams. And very often, and I know you know this, like SEO is for some reason always in the sidelines. And that's it's weird. And because at Square, SEO was about organic search, I should say, was about 40% of marketing new profit. Can you believe that? 40% of marketing net profit was the channel that I led. But yet when I started, it wasn't as part, well, first of all, when I started, it wasn't 40%. It grew to 40%. But anyways, but in any case, so for a lot of companies, it's that case, and they're always in the sidelines. And so the first one of the things that I did is then, okay, you talk with the brand awareness team because there's tremendous, I mean, there's so much you can get from organic search data. For example, the search volume by market, you can see how frequently your brand is being searched, not just your brand itself, but then your brand and product identifiers are searched across market. And that information, I know it sounds like pretty trivial, but that information has to then go to the brand awareness team that they can use it together with what other data sets they have. So then when they even report on it and talk about it, they're able to talk about their own data sets together with organic search. Same thing with the go-to-market teams, those who go into new market expansion. You want to make sure that you're in these conversations and just push through the door and showcase the usefulness of this data. And ultimately, I think what a lot of SEOs, the mistake that they make, and it's not unique to global SEO, it's just a general thing, is they keep thinking that people search for these terms on Google. No, it's before ChatGPT and whatnot, Google was the only canvas where you could type in your thoughts. And so, um, obviously, you get all this information in terms of what people are searching for, and you know exactly what they're searching for, and that's something that should then be used across channels, especially when we get into like conversion rate optimization, especially when we get into like the web strategy, web experience, and whatnot. How they're searching should be something that's used across the board because it's if they're searching for it, they're also looking for it when they're going on the website. So then if you use that information and create a sort of global matrix of how people are searching across different markets, then that can also then educate in terms of the web strategy and web experience. So then already you can see that all of the insights that I've mentioned so far, it's all about taking organic search outside of its silo, outside of its, just box, and just sprinkling in the insights for different teams because it's also helpful for different teams to help them do their jobs and get additional insights on their market. And so I think from a managing up perspective, it really is critical. And at least for me, it's worked really, really, really well. And then you get into the whole conversation of which KPIs that you use. Do you want to go to rankings? Probably not. I've done a lot of work into translating that specifically on market share. So you translate, there are a lot of different ways you can calculate market share yourself, like keyword share yourself versus competitors. But that really, really helps because it's again translating these insights to just general marketing insights that people are comfortable with.
Yeah, so you're making it more approachable
Hmm.
to those executives, to the audience people. So
Hmm.
then I think, and everything that you're saying, I feel like it's really, really critical for the SEOs to like listen to and adapt on,
Hmm.
because that is what's going to enable your team to then execute on, the uniqueness of the
Hmm.
local markets. And I
Hmm.
think that's a piece that oftentimes gets lost or missed, is like
Hmm.
people can latch on to like, yep, I understand there's difference in language, especially it being a completely different language. I also can understand there's difference in US English, British English. Probably not a far stretch for people to recognize maybe some differences in like consumer behavior. Like you called
Hmm.
out earlier, different search engines. I would also assume
Hmm.
too, and from some experience, I've seen that like also, like, beyond those different platforms, you also have different behaviors within. I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
from a lot of input that I've gotten is,
Hmm.
especially in a lot of Asian markets, you have a very strong social presence,
Hmm. Hmm.
which is probably greater than some other markets, and so that
Hmm.
can shift things a little bit. But
Hmm.
maybe, assuming that, we've done our homework, we've been successful in like managing up with it, when it comes to like managing multiple markets and
Yeah.
leaning into the uniqueness of those
Yeah.
markets, like,
Yeah.
what
Yeah. Yeah.
advice would you have for
Mm.
the global SEOs out there?
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. So let's see. I would start. Okay, we can start maybe with the um, the the easy part, which is the partnership with your localization team. And so in that the partnership, it's a how can I put this? Like it's a physical partnership as well in terms of like your work streams, but it's also a technical partnership. Meaning, so whichever CMS you're using has to be connected with the whatever localization program that they used. So then the machine translation can happen directly in the CMS. Now, when I say machine translation, I want to be careful. It's machine translated, but then edited by a human. Um we might get into that topic later, but that's important to know. So there's always someone behind it just checking. But so that makes sure, to your point, that if you're writing something in US English, that it gets properly adapted to UK English. So that's the first part, is like just that local content optimization, local keyword optimization, obviously, local keyword research, local content optimization. And then obviously you've got like the technical stuff, which is um, uh, obviously put it in your subdirectories and hreflang tags. I don't know if we'll get into that, but from a purely adapting perspective, one of the mistakes that a lot of people do, and I've seen it with my competitors, it's not adapting the for the conversion aspect. There's the SEO aspect, which is like, okay, creating your content into like the right local US English versus GB English, but then there's also the whole specifically from the conversion perspective. So let's use an example. For France, I know by experience and also by research that the French market loves anything that's like made in France. So with
Wait,
that,
wait a second. You're saying that the French love French?
the French love the French. What a surprise. Who knew? Who knew? And so, but so as an American company, where it gets interesting is, okay, obviously your product is not made in France. So, okay, that's no go. But what you can do is really showcase how your product can help the French market. And so that's showcasing how we can support the French market. And that's done through various ways. My favorite one is imagery. Super underrated. Like insanely underrated, and this is something that companies do a terrible, terrible job at. And so, okay, so the first one, and this gets a little bit into the CRO conversation of things, but basically, there's also in the test that I've done, number one is if you test people, let's just say you have your product and you test your product on its own versus your product with people using it, the imagery with people will always, in my experience, always convert better. And that shows that people want to kind of see themselves using the product. So there's that personal connection. And this is something that we've seen across markets. The other thing is, so the second point here is think of your messaging. Does it translate across market? I have a great example. This is actually something that happened, I think it was last year or a few years ago. I don't actually remember when, with HSBC, the global bank. They had this slogan called assume nothing. Little did they know, if you translate that to a bunch of other languages, you translate it as do nothing. And they lost $10 million through this basically like rebranding blunder because they didn't think about localizing their slogan, the proper like localization of their slogan. That's I don't know. I love this example because like they just lost 10 million bucks by just not properly understanding local market nuances. Even in previous roles, I had the same issue with the team rebranding their blog to something that is completely nonsensical in other markets. I don't want to state any names or anything, but it's something that was very, very tough to handle because the team was very adamant toward, oh, we're going to name it like this when all other local market owners were like, the name doesn't make sense. And so a lot of companies, they always focus on like US, the US first piece and don't really take into account. The third one is maybe a little bit, I don't know, maybe a little bit controversial, but it's like, don't be afraid of stereotypes. And so by that, I mean positive stereotypes. Let's use the French again because I'm half French. I feel like I can get away with it. So I remember when we were launching in France, we again, like I said, I'm very pro imagery, like using very local specific images to showcase the relevance and that we understand the local market. And so I was asking our creative teams like, okay, I want imagery for Maine for a homepage to basically be the different shop owners, like our product with people in like very French specific not market, sorry, like shops and whatnot, just businesses, sorry, businesses. Well, what does it mean? It means like bakeries, it means wine shops, it means, you get the croissant, you get the baguette and whatnot, Jacques Cousteau. And the response I got, I guess people didn't know that maybe people didn't know I was half French or that I grew up in France. And so they came out to me like, Sebastian, that's stereotypical. Like we're not gonna do this as overly stereotypical. My response to that is like, no, that's just a fact. Literally, if you go to France, 90% of the business you will see are bakeries. And whenever I go to France, my mom will force feed me croissants. Like it's a stereotype for a reason, but it's a positive stereotype. It's not a negative stereotype. And so things are like this for a reason. And so you want to lean into this, obviously, without appearing like a stupid American that goes into stereotypes. But in some cases, it is like that for a reason. And in our case, like, no, it's like most of the businesses in France are going to be like small businesses, wine shops, small restaurants, and things like that. You want to showcase this because it shows that you understand the market. And so that's very important research. And from a conversion perspective, it really makes a big difference. You get other things like the logos, the social proof, anything like that,
Mm,
showcasing local companies and whatnot. I'm working with a brand right now, and they have the same logos like site wide. They'll show a German company on their US website, or they'll show an typical American company on their German website, and it doesn't make sense. It's a very small change, but these things really, really, yeah, really, really matter.
well, and I feel like to that point too, it's like, I mean, yeah, like, yeah, maybe there's stereotypes, but it's also just leaning into giving respect to the uniqueness of that
Absolutely.
market. And
Yeah.
I think even on like a micro scale, I feel like
Hmm.
the automotive companies do a really good job at this. Like if you
Yeah.
watch any local automotive commercial, they're going
Hmm.
to show footage of the car, like the format and design of the commercial will be the same across like nationwide. But
Hmm.
then if I'm in Northern California and I'm watching a whatever brand commercial, I'm
Hmm.
seeing them drive the Sonoma coast, I'm seeing them cross the
Yeah.
Bay
Very true.
Bridge, the Golden Gate Bridge, and it's all like things that I can associate with like,
Hmm.
and I feel like it really ties into more, I don't know, like factors of consumer behavior, where in
Hmm.
that sense they want the viewer to see
Hmm.
themselves in the car, and it's like, well, I know that road driving Big Sur and I want to see myself in that new car driving it.
Yeah.
Similarly, in your examples with like shops, it's like, yeah, if you show someone like in France a Costco, like that's not really going to resonate very well because they're like, what is this? Like they won't have any
Hmm.
things. And it's like, yeah, it's stereotypical bakeries, but there's a good reason the bakeries are delicious and it's amazing in
Exactly.
France. So it's like, why
Exactly.
not lean
Yeah.
into that?
Why not lead into it? Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And there's a bunch of other like small things that you can do. One of the other ones is that I noticed is, for example, each market has specific certifications or there's so for example again like with Square you have to be certified by the French government. They give you a seal which is like the rooster and like red, white, and blue, and a lot of companies just promote that on their website, right? And it's something that, for example, Square we never did, even though we obviously had the certification. But these little things, they just again they showcase that you understand the market, that you're also like technically certified in that case. And there's a bunch of these other examples too, whether it's like review sites having the badge of the local review sites and whatnot. So, like, what's interesting here is we're getting kind of even away from the SEO side. Obviously, there's a lot more on the content strategy piece that we can talk about after. Yeah, we can talk about that afterwards. But from like the first stage, I really think it's a web strategy piece. It's like figuring out the demand in each of these
Mhm.
markets and then figuring out how you go to market and how you're going to target the local consumers through basically like going away from SEO, but like focusing on conversion and web strategy, and then the tactical piece, which is the local content strategy and how to go about that.
No, I feel like we can't talk or we can't completely talk about globalization without really digging into content. Because clearly, a lot of the
Mm,
technical side stuff, you have some nuance, but it's not, what you would do in one market. It's not going to be drastically different than the other, except
mhm.
for, pointing search engines in the right spot. But how about content? What's like the kind of rule of thumbs or the approaches for kind of giving respect to the local markets and content?
Mm. Yeah, yeah. Good segue. I think in my experience, this is where a lot of companies don't have a very good playbook. And so the way that I go about it is I first of all try to understand how my current content is performing globally. So I guess there's two cases. Like if you want to expand globally or if you're already in different markets, I guess it doesn't matter that much, but I just look at how it's performing globally and I'm trying to see, okay, are US content, let's just say you have one EN page and that's meant for globally. How does that page perform in the US versus how does that page perform in the UK versus Australia versus Canada and whatnot? And that could be super interesting because if you notice that it doesn't perform well, in a lot of cases, most likely it won't perform well if you have one EM page. That usually means that you're lacking a lot of local distinctions. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of other factors at play for sure. I don't want to simplify it that much, but still, for me, that's a really good indicator, especially when we talk about like in the SaaS world, in product pages. This is where the conversation gets interesting. It's like, okay, do you want maybe you want to have a page for UK versus US? So that's the type of conversation that you want to get into. So in any case, you start with this, and then let's just say you notice you have a specific piece of content, let's say informational, that is not doing well in the UK. Then you can start thinking about localizing this into ENGB, for example. And then you implement the hreflang tags. I'll talk a little bit more about the hreflang tags because there's some very interesting research that I've noticed on my end. But anyway, so you implement the tags, then that's the localization part. Sorry, the localization part is then you localize that into GBEN. And then there's the optimization part, which is you use a semantic content optimization tool the same way that you would optimize any piece of content. And you redo this process, which is basically researching all of the local specific terms to target. So then that first phase is you're not targeting anything that is, sorry, I meant like the global specific terms. You're not initially researching the local terms. You're keeping it global. So you're trying to understand like if I'm targeting something in the US, a specific topic in the US, can that same topic also be targeted in AU, in GB, in Canada, and in other countries, and even in non-English speaking countries, France, Japan, and whatnot. Because what you want to do is for that specific topic, you want to connect it via hreflang tags. So you're creating this just global topical hub where you know that a specific topic holds relevance across the globe, and everything is connected via hreflang tags. The reason why I swear by this strategy is because one thing that I've noticed is when you grow globally, most likely there's always going to be a few markets where you don't hold high authority. And let's use Japan as an example. In previous companies I've worked, APAC has always been tough. And so by following this framework, what I've actually noticed is authority actually gets transferred over via hreflang tags. And I think I've heard Google say not really, but I don't believe it. I've seen the complete opposite because whenever I've had issues on sites with hreflang tags, the local content always ends up dropping. And I think that's fascinating insights if you think about it, because then that means that actually proves the point that when you grow, when you want to grow into a specific market, you want to focus on topics that already exist in other markets, and you build that authority with the hreflang tags, with the related content abroad, and you use your most authoritative market to then help the smaller markets. And this really really works well. And then the second phase is you can then start targeting the local specific terms, and then that allows you to then get into the local market. And it's basically a global local approach. It's like a think globally and act locally, or if anyone's seen the movie Up in the Air, it would be the locale from George Clooney.
Fair.
So yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah. So it's like basically you're using, let's call it like your primary market
Hmm.
as your foundation to then translate or just localize if it's the same
Hmm.
language. And then from that, you're like using that as the foundation for each local market. And then you're
Hmm.
adding nuance in addition to it from there.
Yeah,
With
exactly.
some of like the localization aspects, like, so let's take like one language, and you
Hmm.
made reference to English and then differentiating, UK versus US.
Hmm.
What's kind of like, what would be your rule of thumb of where to draw the line into like diminishing return for it? So obviously
uh,
like US, UK, obvious ones, Australia, probably another obvious one. But
hmm.
then you also have ones like Canada's probably another good one, but then you have
Hmm.
Ireland, Scotland.
Hmm.
Like, what's the kind of point that you're like, okay, yeah, it's probably not worth having some separation or
Yeah.
some differentiation between, I don't know, Scotland and Ireland?
Hmm. That's a really good question. What's interesting is I don't in the rankings, what I've noticed is there's a correlation between geographical closeness. So we actually had a lot of issues over at Square with US content and Canadian content, or GB content and Ireland content. And so for a lot of companies, it's going to depend how different. I don't want to say like how different the culture is, because then I'm going to get burned. We're like, well, obviously Canada and the US is different, which it is. Like in all fairness, obviously it is. I'm not saying anything different. But then it's how different is your product, its marketing, its narrative to the local culture. Like when you're targeting
Mm,
something, um, you can have like SaaS, for example. If the industries between where you're targeting from the US and Canada are drastically different, then I would say most likely the SERP is also going to be different. And then you would then need a local specific page. But if you notice within the SERP, there are a low amount of local competitors. The market and the audience is fairly similar, then most likely not really, and you can get by with one page. So I guess it comes down to just reverse engineering what you're noticing and the amount of local specific competitors. And usually, if there is a high amount of local competitors, that means, well, there is a need for that hyper localization. And based on, again, like the work I did at Square, that is something we noticed. Like in the UK, there's a fair number of local payment providers, and in the end, when I looked at the global competitors like Shopify and whatnot, they didn't do as good of a job in localization as we did. And the data showed that in the end, like we weren't competing against the global guys because we were doing better than them. Our goal was like, hey, let's break through the local the local folks, and that's where the money was at. So I guess that's the way I would go about it.
Fair, fair. And how about as far as, using like more, LLMs or generative AI
Mm,
from like a translation standpoint?
mm,
Like I know before Google would always go on record and saying, human translated content wouldn't be kind of qualified as duplicate content regardless if you have like hreflang tags or not.
mm,
Where's kind of like the point that you would say like you can use some of these automated tools
mm.
versus needing like the human element? Like at this stage, is it something that's more of use it as your first draft, like as if the same for like content creation, and then add
Mm,
a editing layer or like a piece on top that's human?
mm, mm. I think that's the right way of going about it. Ultimately, it goes. It's so much faster to go about it. I mean, the funny thing is, I actually have a degree in local in translation and interpreting and international business, and I keep thinking if I were to do like in 5 or 10 years from now, I was like, is that degree still going to exist? Because I would spend hours upon hours like translating word per word and figuring out the grammar and whatnot. And now you have tools like DeepL or DeepL, however you pronounce it, that really they've mastered that. And so, yeah, there's no reason not to use it. I think there's always going to be a need
Mm,
for the human element, especially in localization. I think this is something that people think that like a localization program manager and localization team are going to go away. I really don't think so because there's the nuance is something that's always going to matter, and like the originality and uniqueness of content is always going to matter, but it's about the efficiency. And right now we can produce and translate content way faster than before at really high quality, but it only gets you maybe 60 to 70% there, and that's not good enough. Like 70% of the way there is not good enough, and you always need someone to manage this, edit it, and just give it that specific touch. But I had nothing against it. We should use it, and it gets you there faster as long as there's the human element that's needed. And I think that type of content, that type of translation will be the one that will win, not just from a ranking perspective, but even just from a conversion perspective.
mm. And I would assume too, like, I remember as well, like we used to take like a similar approach like that, where we would take the content, we'd have it usually in like some sort of Google
Hmm.
Sheets, use kind of the function for translating, and then
Hmm.
have the human editor over the top. I would assume though with LLMs, like you could probably get even closer with prompts versus like more traditional translation tools. Like, is
Hmm.
that something you've seen also kind of gets you, maybe instead of 60-70% there, it gets you 80-90%?
Hmm. You can refine the prompts as much as you can to get something. I read this thing the other day, which I thought was really interesting. I hadn't, I guess I thought about it in that way, but not as much. Someone said that creating uh, content in AI is will be unique content, but it won't be original. So,
Mm,
which I thought was very interesting because I completely agree. So you can refine. So with that thought, and per what you just asked, like you can refine the prompts as much as possible, and that's true. You will get something that's unique to you that no one else has maybe asked that way. But because large language models are based on existing content, things that already exist, you're never going to get something that's purely original. You're never going to get an idea that's completely out of whack, that's completely came out of nowhere because it doesn't have your experience. Like us humans, we're experiencing things that might be brand new all the time versus LLMs. It has to be read somewhere. Now, what's interesting is like with ChatGPT, you can change what you call the parameter setting. So you do a prompt and you put in parentheses, sorry, temperature setting, not parameter. So you put a prompt, you put in parentheses, temperature equals anywhere from 0 to 1. 0 is the wackiest, 1 is the most conservative. So you can play around with this and you could do something like
mm,
create a article about this and this and that, parentheses, temperature equals like zero point 0.1. The default, I believe, is 0.3 or 0.5. I'm forgetting. So you would do like a zero point 0.1, and then you would get something that is very wacky. That basically, like the way it would work is that it's it'll just generate a bunch of like the tokens that are the least probable based on what it's coming up with. So that is how you would get something that's pretty unique and fairly original. But again, it is based on anything that's already existing. And that's why I believe that regardless of how you're doing like prompt engineering or you're refining it, at the end of the day, it's there's always going to be something missing. And for me, I don't know, like 80% is still not good enough. I would want to get as close as possible to something that is based on, I don't know, like human experiences. And I don't know,
Mm.
and that's why if you think about it, right, that's why UGC, like Reddit and Quora, they're skyrocketing in demand. And valid people are demanding UGC, not AIGC. I guess I'm coining a new term.
Been interesting too to watch that like kind of pendulum swing of
Hmm.
like the favorability of UGC. Like I remember, I don't know, like 7 years ago or something, um, UGC was just really tough
Mm,
from like a quality standard, and
that's a
like
good
now
point,
obviously
actually.
it's a
Yeah,
lot more favorable.
that's a good point.
And then I agree with you on the originality versus uniqueness. It's like
Hmm.
it is kind of a fun thought process though of like, well, even within humans, like how
Hmm.
much of our thoughts are truly unique versus previous experiences and things like that. So it's like
Hmm.
you kind of go down that like slippery slope of like,
Mm,
okay, well then I learned this from someone else piece.
hmm.
But I think as far as guiding in like a writing standpoint, I would agree with you that it's like the main piece, or at least what I kind of like push people into, is the firsthand experiences. It's like
Hmm.
opinions, firsthand experiences, like those are things that are like more human in nature, which
Hmm.
is, yeah, you could say people regurgitate that as well, but it's maybe not as like extreme.
I guess everyone they have their own way of writing, and so that's something that maybe they'll appreciate. And same on the global side, whatever you're writing, especially if you think about, I mean, if you think about British English or American English, it's not just a spelling difference.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, there's word differences too, but the way that the sentences are structured, you read an article from The Economist versus something from The Times, you'll notice like there are differences, The Economist being British, Times being American. And so when when you localize the content, I don't know if that's true. That's more of like a feeling. I feel like someone who's British would notice it, like, oh, that sounds British from America. I don't know. I'm making this up.
Yeah.
I assume they would. So yeah.
No, and you have like little nuances just even within, one country and stuff. Like
Hmm.
maybe it's, again, there's always a point of diminishing returns, but I mean, you can tell by the way someone talks where in the US they're from.
Hmm.
And like
Yeah, very
even on
true.
a micro scale, it's like you could pick up on little nuanced details that would differentiate someone from Northern or Southern California, even.
Oh,
So it's like
100%.
there
Yeah.
always is that kind of uniqueness in region.
Hmm.
Going back to hreflang tag,
Hmm.
and so you kind of dropped on that. We wanted to kind of come back there. I feel like this is a common question that comes up
Hmm.
in global approaches, and I feel like you oftentimes hear people having issues with the wrong content showing in the wrong market. Maybe there's problems with the setup of hreflang tags, but like what have you seen as being kind of like the most common issues when a website is having issues with maybe like the UK content showing up in the US market or vice versa?
That's an interesting one. That happens all the time, and a lot of it comes down to it's this is something that goes beyond the hreflang tags. Oh, so first of all, I shouldn't say that actually. The first thing is hreflang tags can be pretty tough to master because you want to make sure that it is relaying from one page to another that are relevant. If you're not doing that,
Mm-hmm.
then Google will choose a completely different piece of content. At the end of the day, like it's a direct like you're telling Google something, but it doesn't have to respect it. Unfortunately, it's same as like a maybe a canonical or something like that. So that's the unfortunate piece. But generally, it's pretty good. I would say in my experience, it's been pretty good at reflecting it. When it doesn't, let's just say you have everything right, your country code, your language code, you've got your X default. That's something that actually a lot of people forget is the X default. What is the default page that Google should showcase if it doesn't know what to do, or if it's from a country they haven't specified or something like that? And yeah, so make sure you have that. Make sure in each country you have your canonical that goes back to the main page. So the AU page should canonical back to your AU page with hreflangs to your US and so on and so forth.
Maybe
Yeah.
can you elaborate a little bit more on the default? Like I
Mhm.
would assume from that it's, you're gonna have like a initial or primary maybe market that
Mhm.
you're producing from. So if it's like US company, they originally started
Mhm.
within US and then they've kind of expanded out. Like would that always be the practice then that in that scenario, like the US one, US English would be the default, or is there situations that you might,
Mm.
use a different, I guess, country as your default?
That's an interesting question. I would say whatever has the most authority should be your X default, wherever or whichever the content originated from. That's kind of my rule of thumb. Yeah.
And would you differentiate that within a company? Like, so say, I don't know if this would be the case with Square, but like you have a global company,
Mhm.
typically things would come out of one country, but then there's times when, someone else might produce something first and then eventually it gets adapted into other regions. Like within one domain, would you always have the same default?
I think so. I think so. I would try to keep that as consistent as possible. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Definitely.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So another mistake that I think this one is tough, but it's the language selector. This is something that companies do very, very wrong. The language selector, especially when it automatically redirects you, keeping in mind that Google crawls mainly, let's say, from the US. So if you have like an AU page and your country selector automatically redirects, it is possible that it will automatically redirect Google to the US website, which is a big reason why non-US content ranks above, or sorry, US content ranks above non-US content
Mm,
in non-US markets. And so a lot of companies do this wrong. They don't do proper caching policy. They just have like they see there's a user. They may not differentiate a user versus a bot. There's a 302 or 301 redirect, and then you get screwed over. So that's generally that can cause a lot of issues. And depending on the CMS they're using, how new it is, how old it is, sometimes you have like a bunch of JavaScript redirects, sometimes you have a bunch of parameter. So that can also cause a bunch of crawl efficiency issues with your site, potentially down the line,
mm.
causing ranking issues that can relate to the wrong page being present in the wrong market. So it's
That's
important to have technical hygiene in that case. Like that's even going beyond like the technical stuff. Sorry, the global stuff is just your technical hygiene will have an impact on the local findability, basically.
That's such a good call out too. And it's like one of those things that it's like may seem like a small
Mm,
detail, but
hmm.
then you amplify that out over the growth and size of the website. It's
Yeah.
like those things that maybe wouldn't be an issue on the like the smaller scale, like can
Hmm.
compound into being like a significant point.
Yeah. 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 Exactly. Exactly.
Now we're going to come to our lightning round section of the interview, and I'm going to be throwing out some more short form questions at you.
Mm.
And these ones will have their own kind of theme to it, and then you can kind of riff on, whatever the question is. So the first one is going to be trend or trash. Is using AI multi-language content generation for international SEO all by itself without human intervention a trend or trash?
Oh, without human intervention. Oh, okay. I gotta say trash. I got to. Yeah.
It, do you see a world in which you would feel comfortable in walking away from that human element? Like, I feel like we touched on
Oh,
in the conversation that the gap
yeah.
is narrowing But like,
Mm,
do you think it'll ever get to that 100% point?
that's a really good question. I mean, I'm a manual transmission car guy, so I think I'm the wrong. I have deep biases toward trying to control your machine. So it has to come. I mean, if I'm being honest, it has to come. AI is only gonna get better. We see the differences in just in 1 year and in 6 months. It has to get better, but it is far from perfect. The hallucinations. Okay, maybe this is where the disparity is. People think it's fantastic and great, but a lot of people forget to review what these large language models come up with. Once you
Hmm.
do review, you notice there is a lot of hallucinations. There are a lot of problems, and the output is not great. Even like I use ChatGPT Plus and whatnot just to review a lot of things, like summarize and whatnot. I have to do a lot of editing. Like it's great, don't get me wrong, I save a bunch of time, but at the same time, it's there's work that comes from that for sure. And so I would say right now, 100% human intervention. Like it's like not even a discussion. If we're talking in 10 years, I mean, who am I kidding? 10 years. If we're talking about it in 2 years from now, now you'll still need human intervention, but yeah, it's closing quite well. And I'm sure depending on the prompts, I'm sure you'll be able to put in like more parameters, the more information it gets from its training library, and then it'll probably get personal information as well. I mean, who knows when we're gonna get to that, which is a little bit scary. Then it'll know how to personalize content based on you and your tone, depending on like all the documents that you give access, like Google Drive and whatnot. And Meta, for example, or it's Meta or Grok and whatnot. Grok is using like X, Twitter for training. Meta Llama is using like Facebook, so it's learning your tone and whatnot. So maybe you get to a point where it's like they're able to hyper personalize. Most likely, it's going to happen. I'm not looking forward to that time, honestly. I'm really not. I'm really not. It's just yeah, yeah, yeah.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So Sebastian will always be a manual car driver and never switch to automatic, is what we're getting at.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Until like I'm forced to do it. I'll be like Will Smith in iRobot. If you remember the scene where
Fair
it's like he's
enough.
got his motorcycle parked, and then his like gasoline powered motorcycle parked, and he can only drive it on like certain days or something.
Next one. What's the word? What's one word for the current state of global SEO and why?
Mm. Gonna bring up my dictionary here. I would say fragmented. Right now, we're we're not just optimizing. I don't want to say like we're not just optimizing for Google. Obviously, the large language model share is still very, very low. Nonetheless, it's going to keep growing, and it's really fragmenting how people are are searching. There's the AI overviews, there's AI mode. We're really in this stage where it's evolving. Different search engines, like we've talked about, different search engines based on different countries. User behavior is changing too with AI, how people are shopping online. Everything is demanding some sort of nuanced approach, basically. So also, given that there are going to be diminishing returns from especially top of funnel informational content, it is going to require people to think more omni-channel. And when I mean omni-channel, I think gone are the days, or gone should be the days that your content gets like 90% traffic from organic search. If you have a piece of content, make sure you leverage it, let's say for social media growth. Make sure you share it on social, leverage that content for other channels, for email marketing, for example. That's another great one. Right now it's everything is still very much silos, so the fragmentation is a tricky thing, but it can also be a good thing because it's forcing SEOs to go out of their comfortable niche that we've been in for the last 10 years. One of the things I'm saying these days, and I'm urging everyone, is to focus on CRO and just web strategy. This is the thing that I'm very, very motivated on, and and very passionate about, because it's making sure that people who work in SEOs can have a full funnel view. You're in charge of driving traffic, but then you better also be in charge of making sure that something happens with that traffic. There's still going to be a need for information on top of funnel, but still. So yeah, so think it's different traffic sources, different search engines, different everything. Yeah, fragmentation is happening.
Fair enough. Next one is game plan. You're the SEO director and you're responsible for launching a website in 5 new markets with limited resources. What's your game plan?
Oh, 5 new markets with limited resources. Okay. Okay. So going back to, I guess, what we first talked about would be the prioritization of market by total addressable volume and aligning it to the TAM, total addressable market. So number one, prioritization. Once you've prioritized that, know which content to repurpose. Going back to what we just talked about before, understand how much of your content you already have that you can simply localize and repurpose for other markets. That's still a lot lower effort than creating something net new. And like we talked about, there is a lot of authority building that can happen doing it that way. So it's super efficient too. So repurposing, number two. And then number three is the technical foundation, making sure that you use subfolders, don't shoot yourself in the foot and go with a subdomain or CCTLD. Google moving away from that shows that. So I hope that's the end of that conversation forever. I know teams of some companies are still going on different domains, but anyways. And then if you have limited resources, well, I mean, use AI, 100%. Use it, but with the human element in the end.
Follow up question on that. Would your answer be the same for folders if the company's not on a .com already? So let's say the company is on an FR, they've been a French company,
Hmm.
and then they're expanding into the US market. Would you still have like folders within the FR site for then English content?
That's a very interesting question. Oh, that's a very, very interesting question. Oh, I need a second to think about that.
Because I'm
Yeah,
with you on the folders, but I feel like that's in a
I'm
.com scenario or like
very
some
true.
universal one, where I feel some smaller markets could be like,
Yeah.
like how many. I mean, let's think of like a good example. Like how many Australians would click on an IT
They
domain?
wouldn't in Japan like you want, or I should say, if you're .jp, you'll never be able to rank in the US.com, even if you have all your hreflang tags and whatnot, because your authority is centered in Japan. So I would most likely run the risk. What I would do, if that's what you're doing, I would run the risk of 100% .com and thinking later migrating your .fr to /fr within .com, depending on the
Uh,
authority
yeah,
that you're building. But
yeah,
that's
yeah,
what I
yeah.
would
So
do.
it's like, yeah, do a phased approach basically.
Hmm.
That makes
Yeah,
sense.
that's exactly right. Yeah.
Next one is buy or sell. Are you buying or selling that search engines will evolve to the point that they won't need to rely on hreflang tags? Maybe let's put a time frame cap on this just to like
Hmm.
ground it. So let's say within the next 3 years.
Then 100% so. Yeah. Yeah. It's such a good signal. It's such an important signal because it allows us to tell the search engines what is the reciprocal page that exists in another market. In the same way that you're telling with that schema markup is you telling the search engine what the specific content is. I thought, honestly, I'm surprised schema is still a thing. And one of my assumptions, like maybe 5 years ago, was that it's going to go away. I was wrong. I was 100% wrong, because my take was that schema is just a reason because search engines aren't smart enough to understand your content. But as machine learning gets better, my take was like, well, of course they're going to understand that's FAQ. Of course they're going to understand that's a review. Why do you need schema? It's just a secondary, it's just a piece of code to help search engines understand your website. But for some reason, they're still very much using it, and large language models apparently still use it very much. So, given
Mm,
this, given the fact that we're still very much advancing, yet there's still a reliance on schema, tells me that for hreflang tags, it's going to be the same until that reliance goes over. Then yeah, but the thing with hreflang tags is even a level beyond schema because it would be hard, I think, for them to truly know what is the actual equivalent globally. I can't think of a world where that's a lot of computation power to figure that out, I think. Hreflang tags makes it super easy for that to happen.
true. And I keep bringing this up, and I feel bad that I forgot who I originally heard it from. But the comment was LLMs are lazy. And I think like the reliance on structured data or the other things, it's like, yeah, it just makes the job a lot easier.
It's a
So
lot more
why
efficient
not
too.
use it?
Well, it's a lot more
Yeah. So I
efficient
guess
because
it,
like the computation power needed to just like one prompt, it's a lot of power. And actually, for your point, that's a good point. Why there is the reliance on structured markup and schema? It's an efficiency play. It's not a capabilities play. It's an efficiency play. That's a good point. Actually, yeah.
well, I mean, efficiency is a nicer way of saying it. I mean, maybe it's
Fair enough.
just, they're mimicking human behavior and being lazy, but efficiency, lazy,
Very true too. I'll take it. Yeah.
So, the last question is going to be crystal ball. With the advances in AI and LLMs, will localized content always hold the same weight?
Will localized content always hold the same weight? Well, yes, and more. I think localized content, I think, will be even more
And
important because
more.
another way to
Okay.
think about localized content, it's even more unique or original content. It showcases that you understand the market that you're going into and that you're
Mm,
not taking a global generalistic approach. So, in my experience, and this can be a little bit tricky, I'm not saying that every company now should localize every piece of content because you don't want to be in a world where you have one web page per country. That's not a good world to be in. So I'm choosing my words carefully here, but there is a world where that also works. And in my experience, when you do a really good job localizing and you're really showcasing why your product is unique or different between US market or GB market or Japan market, even if it's the same product and you're showcasing the differences, I've seen that being really an advantage from a ranking performance and conversion standpoint, 100% like we talked about before. So I think the localized content will hold even more value regardless of AI LLM. I think the AI LLM might just bring that laziness into so, or if they can really help us make it even more, if they can help us with even further showcasing the market uniqueness between each market, then that can be a huge advantage, which I think obviously they can help. Yeah.
100%. I I agree with you from my
Mhm.
side. I would say it's simply because of consumer behavior. Like, as long as consumers are more likely to connect, relate, trust with localized
Mhm.
content, then no matter how sophisticated the systems are, they're
I think I
always going to
saw this.
want
I
to
wrote it down
reward that
somewhere.
because they're
I
chasing that
saw
same
this
user.
statistic actually. It was something, and I can't seem to find it right now, so I'm gonna paraphrase it, but it was something that from a purchasing standpoint, consumers are 40% more likely to buy a product that's been localized than something that is general. So that's a pretty high share, 40%.
Mm.
And right now, there's this other statistics that I saw. I'm not sure if it makes sense, but it's something that the web is 55% English content, but there's only like a 5% of the population that's native English. Now, that's not exactly true because I know India is not native English, but a lot of people in India speak English. So I think that 5% is a little bit understated. I haven't done my math here. But ultimately, if you think about it that way, that's a if 40%
Mm,
want to are more likely to buy if it's localized content, and most of the websites out there are in English, then there is a huge opportunity to actually localize into non-English or different variations of English to try to appeal to your prospect buyer and actually make a lot of money. A lot of brands are probably leaving a lot of money on the table because of this and not understanding that global relevance.
100%. It's we're coming back to I
Mm,
think the principles and the
yeah,
basics
yeah,
of,
that's
the
true. I
Mad
mean, everything
Men
what it like
kind of
everything goes in
advertising
circles,
days.
right? Anyways, it's all a cycle.
Absolutely. Well, that's going to wrap up this episode of the Voice of Search podcast. Thanks again to Sebastian Egger for joining us. Be sure to check out his information in our show notes. You can connect with him on LinkedIn or go on over and check out his company's website at seoseb.com. If you haven't subscribed yet and you'd like a daily feed of content and SEO content, be sure to hit that like button in your podcast app or on YouTube, and we'll be back in the following day. So